About immigration. And so my large question for you is, what makes someone a true American? First of all, we need to understand the difference between immigration and emigration. And yes, they're both words, and yes, there's a major difference. Immigration is when people permanently leave their native country to come to another country. So people that come to America are immigrants. They are immigrating, and that is the process of immigration. Emigration is from the perspective of the native country. So when people leave the United States and say emigrate to Canada, they are going away. So emigration is from the perspective of the country from which they are leaving. Okay? So immigrants come to a country, emigrants leave a country. Mass immigration. It's important to understand that there is a certain type of Americans. America was founded by, or the United States sort of originates as an English colony. So most Americans in early U.S. history are English. And in the 1800s, we have what's called old immigrants, meaning the first wave of immigration. And these people are typically from Northern and Western Europe. So they're Northern and Western Europeans. So if you think about what Northwest Europe looks like, this is where we see places like England, Ireland, Germany, and Scandinavia. So Scandinavia is like Norway, Sweden, Finland, Denmark, even places like the Netherlands, where the Dutch are, that type of thing. So old immigrants in the early 1800s, people that are immigrating to the United States as it's sort of becoming a new country, are essentially white. They all kind of look the same. The English and Germans are relatively similar in their appearance. They're also... Actually, it's important to know that in 1816, there was a huge migration of Irish people to the United States after a major potato famine in Ireland. And English, Irish, German, and Scandinavians are all Protestants. So they're all Protestant Christians. Remember that Protestant is a branch of Christianity. And so it's all Christians. There are three major branches of Christianity. Protestant is the major one, which most of the early people that came to the United States were Protestant. This is very similar to the Americans that were already there, the English, the Pilgrim-esque people that had come to the Americas before 1800. And so they were mostly Protestants. There's a new, the Irish, though, were mostly Catholic, and so the Irish had been kind of persecuted or judged or sort of ostracized in American society. They were definitely the lowest of the low, and we saw that with the race riots that broke out during the Civil War, where the Irish felt really strongly that we should not fight the Civil War to save black people who would come and compete with their jobs. So in the Industrial Revolution, there's a new wave of immigration. I think largely this happens because the Civil War ends, and so the United States is now a safe place to immigrate to again. And so, there's sort of a pause in immigration, and now there's a new wave of immigration because the Civil War is over. So between 1860 and 1915, another 28 million people immigrate to our country. And these people, though, are usually from Southern and Eastern Europe. So these are countries like Italy, Poland, which was part of Germany at the time, but the ethnic group there is the Polish and Russians. So what's important about this is that these countries are not really Protestant. They're either Catholic, Eastern Orthodox, or Jews. Eastern Orthodox is the third major branch of Christianity, and we actually don't see a lot of that here in the United States, although there obviously are some people that are Eastern Orthodox here in the United States. So there's a key term here, which is assimilation, and you can see the root word similar. So immigrant assimilation. We talked about assimilation when we were talking about Native Americans, and so it comes up again, and that is when immigrants come to our country, should they assimilate? Should they become similar to the Americans, or should they keep their culture? In this time, people expected immigrants to assimilate. They expected Americans to assimilate. They wanted them to Americanize or to adapt to American culture. There was little tolerance for a lack of assimilation, and so people became extremely aggravated by immigrants for not assimilating. And what develops out of this lack of assimilation is essentially, well, and this is a term you should know, ethnic neighborhoods. You have experienced ethnic neighborhoods if you've ever gone to a city and you've been to a place called Chinatown or Little Italy. These are examples of ethnic neighborhoods, and what they are immigrants moving into areas of cities with other ethnic group members. So ethnicity is basically a sense of identity, and that is usually people of similar race, religion, and culture. And so the different ethnicities would sort of settle, and so there would be a section of the area where the Polish settled, and there would be a section of the city where the Italians settled, and there'd be a section where the Chinese settled, or the Koreans settled, or the Germans settled. So examples: Little Italy, Chinatown, and the Lower East Side. These are all examples of ethnic neighborhoods. This is a picture of people coming across the ocean and going to Ellis Island. So Ellis Island is an island in New York. Angel Island is an island in Los Angeles. So people that came across the Atlantic Ocean stopped at Ellis Island. People that came across the Pacific Ocean stopped at Angel Island. And this is where essentially immigrants were processed. It's where we took down their information. It's where we took, sort of the first records of these people in our country. And you can actually go visit both of these islands today. They are shut down. That's no longer how we process people. We process them at the airport typically now. But this is where immigrants were processed. Interestingly, there was a difference between how we processed wealthy immigrants. They were processed on the ship and didn't really have to stop at Ellis Island. And then poor immigrants were inspected for health concerns. And so people came over on the ships, and you would sort of in a very Titanic way, the wealthy people were on the top levels of the ship, and they got to go out on the deck and that type of thing, and the poor immigrants were packed into smaller compartments down in the lower parts of the ship. So Ellis Island was sort of the initiation into social Darwinism in our country, and but you can see people were processed. One of the important people could be turned around at either one of these if they were bringing in some sort of disease. They weren't allowed to come into our country. The picture on the right, this man is inspecting his eyes, looking for a certain disease that sort of manifested in your eyelids, and so you could tell if somebody had it because they would have some sort of rash there. There was a lot of opposition to immigration. Many people were frustrated by immigrants' lack of assimilation. A lot of older immigrants blamed the new immigrants for low wages because these new immigrants would come over and they would be so desperate to find a job, to find a house, to find whatever, that they'd be willing to do whatever jobs were available. And so so, the Irish that came over, say, in the early 1800s, they're the lowest of the low in the country. And they feel, they're trying to work to get higher pay, etc. And then somebody basically comes in and says, "Oh, I'll do that job for 50 cents less." And so that really sort of undercuts any negotiation or any work that they've been doing. So they blamed a lot of the new immigrants for low wages. We can see this today. A lot of people blame Mexican laborers that are coming into our country for messing up our economy, for reducing the wages, etc. There was an intolerance of religious differences between the different groups, and so many people, were opposed to Catholicism and other things. Immigrants were denied certain rights. It became difficult to become citizens. They were denied voting rights and other things. Immigrants essentially became a scapegoat for any problems in the country. If there was a problem, blame it on the immigrants. That's a sort of an easy way to sort of pass off blame. Immigrants were also denied certain jobs. You had to be essentially English-speaking, white, Protestant to be the top of the line. So when we look at our society today, it's really important to remember that most of anybody who has sort of white ancestors, they had a huge leg up on any, obviously black people, but also on any person who's from an immigrant background, and especially if that immigrant background is Catholic or basically different than the traditional English Protestant. Here is a poster where that talks about the Chinese Exclusion Act, which we're going to talk about right now. The Chinese Exclusion Act was passed in 1882, and what it did was it banned Chinese workers from immigrating to the United States. It lasted for 10 years, and it forbade the citizenship of any Chinese person. So even though other immigrants were getting the opportunity to become citizens, the Chinese in particular were not given that opportunity, largely because I think their religious and cultural background was so different than other immigrants. It was really difficult for Americans to cope with those differences. Tomorrow in class, we are going to read parts of the Chinese Exclusion Act and look at why this was such a big change. The Chinese were used largely because they were incredible workers and willing to do challenging work, and we can thank the Chinese for the building of the Transcontinental Railroad, because they, along with their Irish counterparts, built most of the railroad, the Chinese largely working from the California side. So something dramatically changes here between our need for the Chinese during the building of the Transcontinental Railroad and the Chinese Exclusion Act. So we're going to look at that in class. So please bring to class your exit question, and the question is, should people have to assimilate to a new culture when they move to a new country? And a secondary question is, was the exclusion of the Chinese unjust?